Thank you so much for coming on a rainy day. So I left this on so you know what I'm talking about, and of course it's based on the exhibition that we did at the Metropolitan Museum this spring. And here I just start with an image. So the motive of the open window was one of the most popular and a favorite motive during the early 19th century in Northern Europe, foremost in Germany, in Denmark, in France, and in Russia. And these are the two windows by Caspar David Friedrich, Germany's most famous romantic painter, that inaugurated this motive. He painted in sepia these two windows of his studio in Dresden, and he had a view over the Elbe, and you see his right window on the right and the left window on the left. Nobody had done something as stark and austere. It's just a window. There is really no content, it's not an interior, it's not a landscape. The right window was much exhibited in Dresden at Academy exhibitions and much written about. And it influenced other artists. Friedrich tried to sell them, but he was not successful, thank God, because that way they knocked around in his studio unsold and influenced other artists. Here you see Friedrich in that studio in Dresden. It was his first own studio. He was not a man of means, and his studio had been compared by artists who visited him and admired him as a monk's cell. And you see how empty this is. The two windows are still there, although you only see the left one. The right one has been blocked. As artists' manuals at the time sort of told artists that they should always block the lower half of the window and only work with light coming from above. So there would be no distortion. And you see the light coming in from above. This picture was painted by a young admirer of his, Georg Kersting, who, as Friedrich, also studied in Copenhagen, and which inspired, both Friedrich and Kersting a sort of sense to put great emphasis on light. And you see Friedrich sitting there rather formally in a coat, in a sort of jacket, which of course he would never have worn. And it is one of three versions. The picture was so popular. So this is the first one from about 1811. It's in Hamburg. And two other ones, one is in Berlin, slightly different, and a later one in Mannheim. Here is Friedrich again in painting his wife, looking out the window. This is sort of an icon of Romanticism. It's a picture in Berlin. It was the cover of the catalogue, and thank God we got it as a loan. And here you see his wife, his only portrait of her from the back, looking out of the window. And as Friedrich's figures in his landscapes, he always showed figures from the back, not from the front. And she, in a way, we identify with her and her vision. She looks out over the Elbe. You see a sailboat there, but it's sort of made believe as if the boat runs very close to the window. Not at all. I was in Dresden 2 years ago, and I looked for the house where Friedrich lived. Of course, it's bombed. It doesn't exist anymore. The street is still there. I knew the street from the map, and I looked at least for a sign, that a street sign or a little plaque saying, this is where Caspar David Friedrich lived. Nothing. There is a school there now. And where Friedrich painted his first two sepias, there is a parking place for tourist buses. So there is no trace of him left. This picture is so iconic, tons have been written on it by art historians, giving it all sorts of meaning, from the symbolic over the religious. People see in the window cross all sorts of meanings, but it would be too tiresome to go into it. Enough said that this really is the starkest image of the dark interior and the light outside. And this encapsulates what a German poet, Novalis, said in his fragments of around 1798, everything at a distance becomes romantic. Distant people, distant landscapes, distant events. And this image, in a way, is an encapsulation of this saying by Novalis. And here, this is a detail of a picture by Dahl, a Norwegian who lived, who settled in Dresden in 1821, and he painted the street in which Friedrich lived from the other side of the Elbe. And you see this big tree, and if you go to the right of it, you don't have a stick here, do you? No. It doesn't matter. There are these little row houses on the right. In one of them lived Friedrich before he was married, as a poor artist in this monk-like setting. And if you go to the left of the tree, you see that bigger house that is yellow. That is where Friedrich lived when he married, where he painted his wife at the window. Just to give you an idea, and you see that he invented, there is no sailboat that would flow by directly under the window, because you see that the riverbank is rather broad. All right, so I show you now three groups of pictures: people in interiors, then artist studios, and then empty rooms and open windows. And I touch here and there on influences. This is also by Kersting, Georg Kersting, who was younger than Friedrich, admired him very much. This is one very wonderful interior that looks not German, and it was not painted in Germany. It has a French taste to it. Kersting was a tutor, a house teacher with a princely family in Warsaw, and he painted this evocative picture. It's just called Couple at the Window. We don't know who they are. The man seems to sort of have, he leans at the window, he seems to be there to pick up that woman in a long empire dress. It's a bad slide, but we see through the window a landscape of rocks, which is a landscape Kersting put there from the Riesengebirge. And you see a mirror, and it reflects that fine French furniture, and it's a picture in Schweinfurt. I had great trouble getting it as a loan, but it finally came. Here you have again Kersting, and you see this is a Biedermeier interior, much more German. It's 1820s. He painted his wife from the back. She is braiding her hair, and perhaps you notice all these walls are green. That was a sort of favorite color at that time. Again, a landscape visible through the window, and rather unusual. The table, the Biedermeier table, seems to be a base to put her garments. Here, Kersting on the left, one again of three versions of a very popular picture that he painted. It's just called Woman Embroidering, and she's sitting there. We know who she was. She was a Louise Seidler. She was a painter. And in her memoirs that she wrote at the end of her life, she dictated them because she became blind. She said it was she who was posing for her friend in Dresden in another friend's, von Kügelchen's apartment. On the right, I show you a Danish picture, and you note that all these people in these interiors, they embroider, they sew, they read. They are very sort of modest ways of being. Well, they are just modest, not even amusement. As a background, it was the time of Napoleonic Wars, so the 1820s. And you see, this is Germany, Dresden on the right, Copenhagen, the artist is Berensen, Kersting on the left, Berensen on the right. And here we go to Russia, where a very similar atmosphere and mood. This is an artist, or attributed to an artist, Tolstoy. He was belonged to the family of the famous writer. He was an ancestor. It's a woman sewing. It's an interior in St. Petersburg. Unlike the Germans, where Kersting would always paint people with a lost profile or from the back, this woman sort of looks up as if she's interrupted in her work. But you see the same taste, Biedermeier, Empire, black horsehair on the canopy, green walls, here, that is also Russian, by an artist called Zelenstov. This is an apartment in Moscow. A man who is in a room enfilade, rather more elegant. It's all Empire furniture. You see a window bank on the right. To the left, everything is dark. That would be the domestic interiors. And the man, instead of looking out or using the light of the window, faces a portrait. I would think perhaps the woman is related to him. Perhaps she is some family member that he lost. Unfortunately, all the pictures I show you from Russia, they were supposed to come to New York but didn't come because there is an embargo of loans from Russia at the moment. And here we are in Denmark again. This is by an artist called Beens. It's one of the, we could say, one of the finest pictures of the Danish Golden Age. You have what might be the last meeting of his two brothers. One of them who stands there facing a skull. He was a doctor and the interior are his chambers in a hospital in Copenhagen, and his brother sitting on a canopy, again with black Biedermeier horsehair, must have come to visit him, because when one looks closely, which I did, you see that he has a little bandage through which blood is seeping on his foot. The picture looks empty, austere, but in a way it's rather cluttered. There's a flower pot, there are some bottles, there are papers. It's a bachelor's place. But again, what is really the content in these pictures is hushed silence and light. There is no other content. And that is one of the characteristics of these pictures, of these interiors in which light is really the main subject. You would never guess, when you look at these very quiet and hushed interiors, that it was a time of chaos and war. It was the time of the Napoleonic Wars from 1805 to 12. And this is an Eckersberg picture that shows you the bombardment of Copenhagen. And here is another Eckersberg, just a sepia. This is Copenhagen after the bombardment. Most of the city was bombed. The fleet was destroyed because Denmark was on the losing side of the Napoleonic Wars at that period. It sort of never took side, so the English bombed it, and Denmark never recovered until the 1830s. So it was a city really of great. It was a time of great hardship. Similar, Dresden, at the same time, Dresden was occupied by the French. There was hunger, there was misery, there were epidemics, but all this, in a way, you would never guess when you look at these hushed, quiet rooms. And one might say this is another casting of a man seen from the back. Light filters in. We don't know who he is. People have first thought, or for a while, that it might be an self-portrait by the artist, but the furniture is much too fancy. It would not be him. He might be, I have some ideas who he might be, but it really doesn't matter in the context of this. I just want to show you this quiet, hushed interior. After the Battle of Leipzig in 1812, when the Germans, or the Prussians, together with Russia and Sweden, defeated Napoleon, and then the tide turned. But that was not until 1812, but then it took again many, many years for the countries to recover. The French left. And here, to show you that actually a man at a window is not a new motive. This is by an artist, Georg Friedrich Schmidt, from the, I think, 1750s. Forgive me if I'm not too precise. That you see there is already, this is a print, the motive exists. But, of course, the man faces us, which detracts. The spider in the window also distracts. So there's a completely different mood. It's cluttered, although you have a man at a window. Here we go back in time. Figures in interiors with windows is nothing new. Saints and the Virgin Marys were depicted in interiors with windows. Forgive the bad photograph. I discovered that picture when I was in Cologne. It's in the museum, Wallraf Richards Museum, and this is from the mid-15th century. You see the Virgin, and you have two windows, one on the left with a garden, and another, a Gothic window on the right. And here, 200 years later, the famous Vermeer, the woman reading a letter, which is in the museum in Dresden. And of course, all the artists in Dresden would have known this picture, and casting, of course, knew it. But of course, you see the difference here. The window is a source of light, and you don't see a view through it. And it's in an oblique angle to the picture. It's not parallel to it. And the main subject here is really the woman, and the window is just a light source. The Royal Collection in Dresden, with its huge collection, was one of the reasons many artists moved to Dresden, because they needed those pictures to look at. That's also why Caspar David Friedrich went to Dresden, and Kersting and others. And here, on the left is a picture that has often been cited as being the sort of inspiration for Caspar David Friedrich's Woman at the Window, or for the Tischbein that you see on the right, which is Tischbein's famous watercolor of his friend, the poet Goethe, looking out at a window in Rome. But of course, nothing could be further, because first of all, Caspar David Friedrich did not know this bulls. Also, also this Tischbein has been cited as a source for Caspar David Friedrich. Of course, Friedrich couldn't have known the Tischbein because it was in a collection where he would not have had access to. But I think it's a wonderful comparison. The picture, the watercolor on the right is from the 1780s. The image, the painting on the left is from, I think, 1650s, and it shows a well put together woman looking out at the window. She is interested what is going on the street, but of course she is rotund. We would not identify with her or her angle of vision. It is just a genre picture. And of course, nothing in a way, although superficially they seem similar, but the Tischbein in a way is a striking predecessor to the Friedrich. It's anchored in the center, the figure of Goethe, and it is like the Friedrich, a sort of interior that is dark, and a person looking out, although it is rare that you have a man looking out a window, as in the Tischbein. This is what a colleague in Basel sent me when he, I think, received our catalogue, and he said, look, nothing is new with people looking out of windows. This is a drawing in the Kunstmuseum in Basel of a little boy looking out the window from 1565. Now I show you artist studios. This is by an unknown artist. It's in a museum. His name is Cochrane, and it is a self-portrait of him in his studio in Paris, in Montmartre. Beyond it, you see the hills of Montmartre with how you call that? Windmills, exactly. And Cochrane is not known because he died, unfortunately, very young, and it's a naive picture, really. But I included it to show, actually, that in artist studio, even you see in France, also you see a green cloth. They also covered the lower part of the window to work only with the light coming from above. And here is the young artist, formally dressed, with a jacket and a nice shirt. And we don't know what is going on his easel, but one might say he might be torn between nature, which beckons from beyond the window, and the bust, the classic bust. So an artist drawn or torn between nature and copying classical art. And you see in the studio there are all sorts of strange feet. There is a woman's boot on the right, there is a man's boot on the left. Here we come to another French artist, but this is Allot, depicting his friend Picot. They were both students at the Villa Medici. They, French artists, applied for the Prix de Rome, which allowed them to spend 5 years at the Villa Medici, the French Academy. And you see here Picot posing for his friend Allot, and you see him in his studio, and you see also there are lots of works, sort of watercolors and drawings. And my dear colleague Asher Miller, who is a curator at the Metropolitan Museum, and he's here, he helped me identify all these works on the wall in this interior. And you see a magnificent view of the skyline of Rome. Of course, it is invented. Many of the students at the Villa Medici, to commemorate their stay in Rome, even if their windows, I mean, no matter where their windows pointed to, they put a fine panorama of Rome as a souvenir, and to remember they stay in Rome. Here is another artist, Cornier, who painted a self-portrait, also at the Villa Medici, and you see these impressive Renaissance interiors, how these ceilings are very high, the darkness, but here he faced the garden of the Villa Medici, so you have something that looks like a plein air a study of nature. The picture, he made believe that he had just arrived from Paris after an arduous trip. That was before trains, and so a trip from Paris to Rome must have took many months because they had to cross the Alps. And you see his luggage there, and he made believe that he had just received a letter from home. During those 5 years, these artists did not see their families because why spend months going back and forth? So letters from home were very important. And see, this is the view from the window, and it's really like a plein air study of nature, magnificent. In Germany, artists did the same. This is a watercolor by a German artist, Yenge. It's from Berlin. I admit I never heard the name before myself. And here you see the artist at a window in his studio in Dresden. You see him from the back, and he was an artist also who did work for the theater. And you see the magnificent competition between the light on the table and the play of shadows on the ceiling and the two views through the window. Two open windows from other artists on the left in Austria, Alt, A-L-T. He depicted his view from his studio over what were then the outskirts of Vienna, today of course part of the city, and he in a way rather fancy furniture for an artist. It's Biedermeier, and he seems to have just left his chair. On the right, a French artist, again at the Villa Medici, Moyot. It's from a museum in Valenciennes, and again he put the St. Peter's Church in there, and the Sant'Angelo fortress and the Tiber. Of course, he couldn't see it from his window either, but he put it in there. They are both works on paper. In Italy, it's an Italian, Gubernatis. He was working for the Napoleonic government, and he was in Turin, and when he learned that he was transferred to France, he took farewell of his beloved room, so he painted a farewell of his studio. This is from Turin. And here we come to artist studios. This is attributed to an artist called Drolling, and you see a young woman with her tutor, in a way focusing on a boring still life which is across from her, but through the window, which she does not in a way look at, is Saint-Eustache, the church, which is still there. Saint-Eustache was where the famous area of where the, what is it called, the marché was, the what? No, the Hall, les Halles, where you know, people went at 2 o'clock at night to have an onion soup, but where, you know, Les Halles, exactly, that's right, it's still there. And here is another by Drolling, by Martin Drolling on the left. It's a picture in the Pushkin Museum, painting a young woman who uses the window to trace a landscape through it. And on the right, his daughter, who was a painter, the whole family, the brother was also a painter, and you see her on the right. She is tracing, she's also using the window, tracing it to do, I think, a tulip or something. And on the floor is one of her designs that must have been a failure, and there is a little squirrel. But I show you these pictures too because in France, women artists were depicted, not in studios wielding brushes, but in sitting rooms or salons and doing tracing or you know, drawing. There are no pictures by women artists from Germany. I mean, there were centers, Dresden or Berlin. Somehow the Germans were too provincial. It was the worldly cosmopolitan French who depicted women in their studios. It would have, I showed you earlier the casting. One moment, please. I don't know if you remember, I showed you the casting of a woman embroidering. She was a painter, but of course casting would have sort of, it would not have been done to depict her as a painter. So she was depicted as a woman who embroiders. Now we come to just windows and empty rooms, no more people. This is by Karus, also an artist in Dresden, also an admirer and first follower of Friedrich. But Kersting was a man who wore many, many hats. He was a doctor. He was a gynecologist, he was a writer, he was a correspondent of Goethe, he was a theoretician, he was very busy. You see him here on the left, his studio, and he in a way gives this famous motive a twist, because he blocks the view with the back of a canvas, à la Magritte already. And in a way, he did not want to copy Friedrich. And on the right, he shows also his studio again, but at moonlight. And with his palette, it's a picture in Karlsruhe, and I saw it under strobe light in the restoration studio in Karlsruhe, because the picture looked empty, but it's not at all. On the right and left from the window, there are paintings, there is a piece of furniture, there are all sorts of things in it, but it looks wonderfully stark as just a night scene. And of course, as all artists, they twist reality to fit the picture. The moon through the window is not a full moon, it's a partial moon. And that partial moon, in a way, could never give such a strong light to illuminate this window. It looks really as if it's a full moon. Karus did like the moon, and he painted lots of moonlight scenes. And here you see that's also by Karus. He did paint the Elbe, but he would not copy his friend Friedrich to paint it through a window. So he paints it here of a woman who is being, on a boat, and in the background you see the skyline of Dresden. Here is another friend of Friedrich, Dahl, a Norwegian artist who moved to Dresden and became a friend of Friedrich's and became even his neighbor, his upstairs neighbor. Dahl was very much more successful and outgoing than Caspar David Friedrich, and he lived above Friedrich and painted this view of a castle of Pillnitz, which of course he couldn't see from his window, because he should have seen from his window the Elbe and what Friedrich saw, which was the other side of the river Elbe, and he painted this. And it's a castle that's, I don't know, a few kilometers upriver, and it's here, which is, it's sort of like a miniature view of this castle, which was built by Frederick the Strong, who, like things Venetian, would go up with his court in gondolas to this castle. It is Dahl's only window view. He painted a lot of river views. Here is one of them, which is in the private collection, and it's Moonlight over Dresden, and it's one of, he did some 40 river views. Thank you, Armin, for allowing that picture once to come to the Met. There. And here, back to the open window, on the left is a Dresden artist, Faber, who depicted, again, the Dresden skyline. And Faber was not in the circle of Caspar David Friedrich, so he had no qualms to copy Friedrich, because he probably didn't even know Friedrich's work. And so this is a view of the Elbe that he did from an inn that was a little bit outside of Dresden. It's a picture that was just bought by the museums in Dresden, and of course the view doesn't exist anymore. And on the right is one, again, a treasure of the Danish Golden Age, an artist called Roaby. He painted the view outside of his parents' window. He was young then, lived still at home, and lucky man, he could see the harbor of Copenhagen, which is beyond the window. It's rather a cluttered picture. You see he put all sorts of flower pots and little feet in marble, and then a bird cage that seems to hang and float in the air, and a mirror, and yeah, there. Sorry, there is one person there on the right. It's Schinkel, famous Schinkel. These are two pictures by Cattell, a German artist, who traveled with his friend, the architect Schinkel, in Naples. And on the right, you see the famous architect in their hotel room. They lived very poshly. And you see through these nice doors, you see to Capri. It's a picture in Berlin. And on the left, you see the same, or it was during the same trip he took with Schinkel. You see a different view towards Vesuvius puffing in the background. And it's a picture in Cleveland, and you see that ugly little dog standing there, and I wish he hadn't painted that dog in there, because in a way it doesn't fit, and it seems inconceivable that Cattell, who travels with Schinkel, would take his dog along, but he might have put it there as, for scale. When I saw the picture in Cleveland, also in the painting conservation, I said to the conservators, just out of sort of tongue-in-cheek, I said, could you paint that dog out before you send it to New York? They said, no, no. And this is by a German, Wassmann, a picture. He was also a young German traveling in Italy, and you can see even a boring landscape looks evocative if you put it in a frame. And that, in a way, is what attracted artists also to the motive of the open window, because the square and rectangle of the window echoes that of the canvas or of the paper. You see, so it's a purely visual motive, unlike the motive of the moon. You see, moon appears in music, in verses, in poetry, etc. But the window as a motive in Romanticism really is more a visual one. and we come to the artist now, Menzel, Berlin artist, who painted a series of his rooms in Berlin, and thank God that he moved very often, and whenever he was in a new apartment, he depicted his surroundings. And this is his bedroom in Berlin, in Ritterstraße, and you see through the window the red roofs of Berlin, a city then in transition. This picture is from 1848. It's part of a series of 5 famous interiors. People have made snide comments of who is under that bed, but of course it's an artist's bedroom, and the artist, in a way did not do his bed orderly. So Ritterstraße exists still. It's in Kreuzberg, and of course I also went to Ritterstraße to look for his house, and of course everything is bombed. The house does not exist. None of the old houses exists there, but he lived, Menzel lived Ritterstraße, I think 48, I don't know, and there is now a huge, ugly yellow brick building, huge, with a supermarket and a fast food shop, but they have a plaque which says Adolf von Menzel lived here from 1845 or 1848 until 1862, and I thought, good for them, they commemorate him. And there you see when he moved out, he made a drawing just of the window, and you see part of it, what you saw in the painting. Wait, let me go back. Here, if you look what you see through the window, already Berlin in transition was being torn down to put new houses up. So this he did as a farewell to that room. And here is another interior of that famous series. That is his sitting room. Of course, you see nothing. It's just the windows are shut, and he worked fast just to catch the ephemeral effect of light. And there are just a few rays of sunlight that bounce through the floor. It's a picture that the Metropolitan Museum bought 2.5 years ago. It's the first Menzel that we bought, and it's one of very few in this country. It's magnificent. And here is another Menzel, also from Ritterstraße, and I show it because it's a very, it's his staircase at night. And the window is much enlarged, it looks like a church window. It's an unusual subject to paint a dark staircase, and it's in a way this picture shows you where symbolism would take the window motive. And we float between floors. You see on the right the staircase goes up, and we are here whatever. You see, staircases then had no elevators at that time, so people walked up staircases, and Friedrich lived high up. And I talked about symbolism. This is Redon with a window from his series, the Dreams, and this is the day, and it looks like a prison. Here you have Manet illustrating the raven, and Edgar Allan Poe's tale of an artist who receives the visit of a raven at night, which sort of predicts his going, losing his mind. Here you have an artist not known in this country really, Hammershøi, a Danish artist, and a woman looking out of the window, seen from the back in black. And in conclusion, the window is being done by artists. Well, this is Matisse, a fauve picture, The Open Window in Cologne, 1956. Here you have Picasso doing a gouache in 1918 in Saint Raphael with a still life in front of the open window, window door. Here you have an American artist, Sheila, who in 1931, in a farewell to his photographing, covers the photograph, the camera under a black cloth. And here you have a photograph by Alfred Stieglitz, same date, 1931. A view through his window of the gallery of an American place. And I just want to tell you that our museum just opened an exhibition devoted to the Alfred Stieglitz collection, and which opens tomorrow for the public, where you will. It's the estate of Alfred Stieglitz that his widow Georgia O'Keeffe gave to the museum in 1949, and you will see this image there too. And here, just to end more on a light-hearted note, satirists have also liked the window on the left. A German, an Austrian artist, I forgot the name, sorry, of a hunting dog waiting longingly for the return of his master, putting his head on the window. And on the right, you have Daumier, the people in the country, sort of who overstay their time in the country house to keep up appearances, bored stiff, but still sticking it out. And here, a couple at night, looking at the moon, standing at the window, watercolor. And photographers also use the subject of people, of a figure at the window. This is an Italian photographer, Santi. I discovered that photograph a few years ago in the New York Times. Because it was at his obituary. He had very close access to the Pope and was able to photograph the Pope a lot. And this is the Pope addressing his faithful in St. Peter's below. And he must have seen Caspar David Friedrich's picture of the woman at the window, because this is not by accident that the Pope is anchored right there in the center. And you see only in the panes of the window, especially one on the left, that the Pope is addressing the faithful. This is 1985 with a microphone there. And now these are the last two. That wonderful draftsman Barry Blitt, who does a lot of covers for the New Yorker, also in this week's New Yorker. This is from 2008. He must also have known Caspar David Friedrich. It's a woman at the window. She ran for, she was the governor of Alaska, who said that she could see Russia right through her window, and you see Alaska, and in the back is Russia. She was a candidate, as you all recall, Mrs. Palin. Yes, and then on the right, there was a series in the New York Times that was called "Windows on the World: Rooms Without a View," and they don't do it anymore. And this was Nadine Gordimer, who sort of talked about, does she need a view? And she said, no, she doesn't need a view, because everything she creates and writes about, she creates from her mind. So thank you very much. That's it.